Spacefair. Hey, welcome to WTUFO. I'm Caleb Mayo. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying the show. I got 3 quick requests for you to help the show continue to exist. One is you could support us directly on patreon.com/WTUFO, or right in the YouTube player. There's a way you can sign up now. If you support us directly, we have community chats where you can engage with us and ask me questions or ask me to reach out to certain guests, things like that. But the main thing you'll get is that the show will continue to exist. So it would be really helpful for us if you could support us for $1 a month. That's 25 cents an episode. We feel like it's a bargain. I hope you do too. Another thing you could do is visit spacefair.co or spacefair.etsy.com. This is my company. We/I make cosmic merchandise. If you see something you like, you can just buy it. If you'd like something that I haven't made, you could just message me and I will make it for you. And the third thing you could do is tell friends about the show. It would be super helpful to expand our reach because I don't do pushy, scandalous marketing, and I could really use your help in recruiting other people who like long-form, thoughtful conversations with folks who have a huge range of experiences from very high woo to very nuts and bolts. If you're enjoying the show, they might too. So thank you for helping get the word out. So just to recap, that's support us directly on YouTube or Patreon or Buzzsprout. Visit spacefair.co or .etsy.com and tell your friends about the show. Hope you're enjoying it. Thank you so much. Enjoy the episode. What the UFO? I'm talking with Chad Wanless again today. Chad, it's great to see you again. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. How about you? Thanks.
I'm good too. Thank you. We're going to do a video analysis. So we're going to jump right into it, and then we'll talk details as we go. This is a video that you found on TikTok. Is that right, Chad?
Yeah, TikTok.
Okay. Fascinating source. The video has like 34 views. Heads up to anybody listening. This is going to be a visual episode. We're watching videos and we're going to do visual deck presentations. So, Chad, why don't you just start explaining what you think we're looking at here? And then we've got about 5 minutes of slower and slower versions of this video to analyze as we go.
All right. So I stumbled across this late last year. It's a disc filmed from an aircraft by passengers. What I liked about this video was it starts out with someone pointing out the window, and then the camera is brought up, or someone's cell phone's brought up to the window and starts filming it. And it lasted all of 11 seconds. But I had been looking for background deformations in videos as an indication that there could be an Alcubierre warp drive, an active operational warp drive in use. The video was quite shaky. I was able to stabilize it using Adobe's software, and then I slowed it down, and then and I ran it through basically on a frame-by-frame basis, looking for background changes. If you've watched the previous interview with Caleb, you'll know that an Alcubierre warp drive warp bubble will cause gravitational lensing, creating a distortion, momentary distortion, as the UAP passes in front of background objects. Most videos are filmed from the ground looking up, so it's going to be background clouds being modified or changed. That's not really a really good object to define a deformation because clouds move because of wind. So, but something like this, where it's filmed from above, looking down, it's a cloudless environment. You can see what looks like some kind of a desert area below the craft and below the airplane. And you can see as it's moving that the background just underneath is actually being slowly deformed on a frame-by-frame basis. And you can see right here, as it's moving, the background objects are being blurred or moving, or both. And it's really interesting, just on a frame-by-frame basis, what is going on there. Now, the original TikTok post, he's actually turned off his comments. But several people said, "Oh, that's a really good CGI rendering." Mm-hmm. And the thing about CGI is, and I've done CGI myself professionally, if you're using 3ds Max or one of the other professional renderers, the background will not change. You have to force it to change. You put in what's called a helper, be it an invisible lens that would create a distortion as the background, as the object's moving in front of the background objects. And the other thing is you'd have to know you needed to do that. And there is some literature on the internet and a paper written in 2001 where people suspected that UAP might distort background objects. The first time it was ever actually noticed was the Aguadilla UAP. Kenneth Knuth was the first one to write about that. He was the first one to notice it. But here, this one is a big disk. It's not a tiny little thing. It's not off in the distance. It's very clear. And you can see here on the right-hand side, that whole background is moving back and forth. And even just to the lower left, there's a little feature that's also being moved. And then there is one other type of rendering. If you're using a video game render, it could accidentally change the background. But there's something else that's you're going to see shortly that nobody knew about. But here's another one. This one I like because there's motion blur where the camera moves slightly and everything blurs, but then it becomes unblurred. But the background objects are still blurred with or without the motion of the camera moving. And so if someone tries to say, oh, this blurring must be from camera movement, but it's not, because you can see the rest of the scene, nothing else is being blurred. Just the objects, the background objects around the UAP are being blurred, which means it's not camera movement causing the blur. That's an important thing to point out here.
Interesting. So one thing that I picked up on that you were describing there is that it sounds like it would be possible to create these blurred effects using Photoshop, but you would have to do it on purpose.
Yes.
Unless you were maybe using a video game rendering. Well, maybe we'll return to that because we're watching the UFO take off now, and it does something really interesting here.
Exactly. So slowing it down, you can see there's this white shape in front of the craft as it's departing. That white shape is a vapor cloud. It's not a lens flare. You can see the lens flares on the disc on the left and right side. So as it departs, this cloud forms in front of it. And in my slide deck, I'll show you. But essentially what happens is a warp drive is going to press the space in front of a craft and expand it behind. Now, when it's compressed in front, it's going to create, it's pulling a lot of space down in front of it. And there's a feature called adiabatic cooling. It's how air conditioners work. If you have moisture in the air and that air suddenly expands rapidly, that moisture or that air will cool down rapidly, and the moisture will form water droplets and form a cloud. And that's what you're seeing here. Is there's a cloud forming in front of it because the air is being expanded rapidly as the compressed space is moving through it.
And you explained this to me last time. This is a phenomenon that happens around other fast-moving objects, or real fast-moving objects like jets, for example, can create like a cone of vapor as they're accelerating. So now that we've made it all the way through on the slow-mo, let's look one more time at the just like regular speed version of this video, which, as you mentioned, is like 11 seconds long. Hard to ID the exact provenance. Again, this is a TikTok video. It's from, I believe, Thailand. So hard to know, hard to reach out. We can't comment on this video, so we don't know exactly where it's from. Basically looking at a drifting disc that is like extremely clear coming toward an airplane and then zipping off at the accelerated speeds that sometimes get described, like this thing just blasted off to the horizon in a single second. So the obvious thing to ask about this is it CGI? That's like the go-to question on everybody's mind, or the natural assumption about what something like this might be. So I just want to make sure I understand your take about the potentially CGI or not nature of this video before we move on to this next part. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so my take on this, why it wouldn't be CGI, is yes, it's a recent video. It's from 2023. there is the very possibility that someone could have done this as a CGI. However, it's important to understand that the camera is moving around and the object is moving around in the scene with the scene. So if you were to try and create a render of a UFO, you would want your camera to be as still as possible, because if you're trying to create a disc and have it follow the background as the background's moving, that's actually really, really hard. You have to move that disc on a frame by frame basis, 30 frames a second times 11 seconds. You're talking 330 odd frames. You have to match, because this camera is moving, as you can see on the right hand side.
Okay, that's a good point. Also, 2023 predates AI video. So it would be a little too soon.
Yeah, it's a little too soon for AI video. AI might have known to do a background deformation, but it still predates it. And but the last part, as it departs, that vapor cloud in front of, everybody knows that when a jet reaches the speed of Mach 0.8 to 1.2 to be exact, there's a cloud that forms behind the craft, not in front of it. If they had decided to create a vapor cloud, it would have enveloped the part closer to the camera instead of in front of it on the top of the screen. So if they're trying to fake it, they put it in the wrong spot.
That's interesting. And it's an elaborate thing to fake anyway, since they only do it for 2 frames.
Yeah.
So 2 reasons, maybe 3 reasons there that we don't think this is CGI, or we think this might not be CGI. One, you would have had to sort of manually adjust this object to lock onto the background for every frame because the camera's moving. 2, this predates AI video. 3, the blur around the object would need to be explicitly created, and it's a little weird and counterintuitive to do that. This blurring effect is something that you've noticed in analyzing a lot of UFO UAP videos, but it's not something that anybody would necessarily know who was just randomly making a video like this. And then 4 is the vapor cloud is a kind of a dead giveaway that either somebody is thinking extremely carefully about the minute details of this, or it's real, which is extremely weird.
And the other possibility is, if this was CGI, the person who created it somehow got information about Alcubierre warp drives from the future, because that vapor cloud was not known.
Okay, so I guess I just want to say emotionally, it's strange to look at something like this and think it might be real. And one of the reasons is that it's so clear. Like, we're looking at a straight up saucer, as described in many a sighting, a circular metallic pie plate disc with like a dome of some kind on top. What do you make of the lighting? Like, does the lighting look right to you? Does the angle of the light match like the angle of the lighting on the plane and in the window?
Yep. Yeah, it does. It does appear. If you can go to the very beginning of it, let's look at the airplane wing. You know what? We need to go to the departure.
Yeah.
That's where the airplane wing shows up.
It's okay. It's only 11
there
seconds.
It is there. So yeah, the lighting is about the right angle.
The airplane stuff is clearly real. Like the window reflection that we're looking at here is clearly real.
Yeah.
That seems extremely difficult to CGI, certainly in a pre-AI era.
Yep.
You feel like the lighting there accords, like it's coming from the right?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I'd say by the looks of it, wherever they are flying, it's probably pretty close to noon. The light seems to be, and then the reflective, the reflections on the UAP show the light is coming from the top left. So that's where the sun is, and you can see there in the cowling of the aircraft that the shadow inside the jet intake seems to match the direction that the sun is reflecting off the disc. So
interesting. All right. Well, I'd love to see this poured through the ringer. So if anybody gets inspired and wants to share this video, we'd love to see other analyses of it. And now we're going to transition into a bit of a deeper walk through some of Chad's scientific analysis. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Okay, cool. And while we set that up, I'll say that Chad is in his day job a layout lead, a chief architect for industrial facilities. He came up as a mechanical designer, and he spent 5 years working with a lighting manufacturer, which is where he got his expertise in optics. So you've got some interesting skill sets that you bring to bear on this, but you're not specifically a graphic designer. You're not a you don't work with cinematic tools, for example, on a daily basis. You probably work with imaging software as an architect, right? A lot of models.
Yeah, I'm trained in 8 CAD programs, and and I include 3ds Max in that as a CGI. I use that for creating presentations for clients. Sometimes still images, often videos that we will create for clients. The biggest use, actually, the one that I'm happiest with is still images for project presentations where we're bidding on a project.
Cool.
The way I put it this way is when you show up and you show some 2D drawings, it's like wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt. But if you show up with a full 3D rendering of what this facility might look like, it's like you're wearing a tuxedo to a job interview.
Nice.
So
yeah, you're ready to go.
That's right. So that's why I've learned CGI, is because it's not my daily job, but it helps me get the jobs.
Okay, cool. And actually, while we're near the concept of your employer, we should mention that you're here entirely in a personal capacity, and that nothing that you're saying is representative of any organizations you work for or with. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So you can see here on the left, I have 2 books. One, the right one, Hidden in Plain Sight, is published. Missing Time 2 will be coming out in the summer. That is actually a CGI render that I created for the cover.
Nice.
And then just a bit of housekeeping information. The typical standard, this information presented is my opinion only, not my employer's opinion. Fair use notice, because I'm using some artwork and video clips. And then and I wanted to make sure everyone knew there's no derived classified materials that were supplied or disclosed to me. So since speaking with you last, I've created a blog on my website, so true-experiences.ca/blog, and I've called it Warping Realities.
Just going to repeat that: true-experiences.ca/blog.
Yeah.
Nice work. So, congratulations on setting this up.
Yep. As I find new things, I will be publishing them. So going over, one of the things that I noticed in that video was how the disc had actually moved left and right. And it turns out it moved up and down. But the reason why I bring this part up, the very first description by Kenneth Arnold, he described the objects he saw in the sky as like saucers skipping on water. And that was the term where terms flying saucers came from, but that's not why he called them that. It was because of the way they moved. So this is basically a compilation, or it's a timeline breakdown of what this object was doing. It moved left, it moved right, it moved left, but it was also descending and ascending and having some horizontal sections, and it was kind of erratically moving around. Not extreme erratic movement, but it was erratically moving enough that it actually kind of matches what Kenneth Arnold described. Now, we had spent a little bit of time talking about that white vapor cloud in front of the object. I had created a spatial compression color-coded what's called a scatter plot, and I did this in Excel. And so you can see the magenta area. That shows where the space is compressed, and then you can see below it where it's expanded. But that compressed space, think of it this way. If you had 10 cubic feet of air and it suddenly found itself inside a compressed space of, say, 100 or even 500 cubic feet of space, it's going to rapidly expand. And when that happens, rapid expansion of gases causes an instant cool down. And if there's moisture in the air, and there's always moisture in the air, but if there's enough moisture in the air, that moisture will form vapor cloud droplets, forming an actual cloud. And well, that's what you saw in front of in the video in front of the object, was this perfect one-to-one correlation of this vapor cloud to the Alcubierre math output of what that compression would look like, which means if this was faked, they had to have done the math calculations to figure out how to fake this. And I discovered this by chance. I was not expecting to see a vapor cloud formation. I was not expecting the compression to be anywhere near anything like that. And the color coding, you can see, is basically in this particular math formula, that's 0.01 of normal space.
So just for people who didn't listen to our last video or feeling a little lost here, I want to try to sum up in layman's terms what I think I'm looking at, and you're the scientist, not me, but my understanding of your idea here is that the reason we're looking at warp effects around UAP in these videos is that we're looking at objects that are flying using some kind of gravitational warping, basically. And so you're using the math of the Alcubierre drive, which is a postulated mechanism for some kind of gravitational warp drive. And you're plotting out what that would look like, and you're matching it onto the visual observations that we're making, that we can make verifiably through these public videos of UAP. And so I'm just curious, what is the density? What made you put it where you did? Like, why did you decide that this was the orientation of the warp field around the object?
Well, the original warp field, as it's shown, was just to counter Earth's gravity. So if it was moving up, if an object was moving, trying to hover above the Earth's gravity, or moving vertically up away from the Earth, this is the orientation you would see. Normally, the Alcubierre is shown horizontally, where it's moving from left to right. However, because I've been I need to demonstrate how an Alcubierre warp drive would counter Earth's gravity, I've rotated it 90 degrees, pointing the compression up instead of to the right.
Okay, and what are the numbers on the sides here? Are we looking at density of like space or matter?
Yeah, it's basically it's in tens of meters. So 0.05 is actually like 5 meters across. And then the numbers on the right-hand side indicate the spatial compression. So 2.5 at the top means it's 2.5 times larger than normal space. And at the bottom, 0.01 means it's 1/100th of normal space.
Okay, this is very trippy. Just reminding myself and reminding viewers that we're talking about warping space. So we're talking about changing the physical qualities of the space-time around this object by warping it somehow. We don't know what kind of power source would be causing this effect, and I'm fuzzy on how gravity fits into that picture. Like, is gravity the method with which we are warping space, or are we warping gravity in a way that affects space? Do you have a theory about that, or is that explained in the Alcubierre idea?
It is explained. I've got a little demonstration that I can show in a couple of minutes that how it works.
Okay,
and I'll get into that in a minute.
Okay, cool. I'll let you take the reins again. Thank you for this side exploration.
No worries. So the next part I wanted to go over, there's another video that was posted almost on Valentine's Day this year. And it was K4 Oklahoma News. They were doing a live news broadcast with a live webcam over the city. And the meteorologist literally pointed out, oh, look at this thing flying across the sky, as he walks up and he points to it. And so I actually traced it. I took the 30-second video and I traced it, and you can see the object is moving up and down across the sky. Again, this matches Kenneth Arnold's description of a saucer skipping across water. And there's a reason why this happens, and I'll explain it much later, but it's essentially gravitational lensing causes the occupant, the pilot, to not be able to see the world in real space. It's like wearing a pair of someone else's prescription glasses. And every time you make an adjustment to your flight controls, it's like you're suddenly wearing someone else's new prescription glasses. So you have to constantly adjust. It's like trying to drive down the street. You change the steering wheel, and all of a sudden, what you thought was in front of you is to the left. So you change the steering wheel again, and what you thought was to the right is now to the left. And so it kind of screws things up. And so you're constantly adjusting it because your prescription lenses is constantly changing. You never know where exactly you're going. And so I have a second video here. This is actually what started the whole thing for me. Now, this video was taken over Colombia, recorded over Colombia, South America. And it was also from another aircraft, from a passenger, and he was filming outside. And then this Saturn-shaped disc shows up and moves across in front of the. Let me see if I can turn the volume off. There we go. And as it moves across the clouds are changing slightly. Now, I saw this on another podcast called The Angry Astronaut, and he had slowed it down in slow motion. And the slow motion made me realize things are happening. So if I rewind it here, watch this cloud right here. And this is 25% speed. This cloud is wobbling back and forth.
Yeah.
Why
very
is
clearly distorting.
Yeah. It should not, under any circumstances, wobble like that. So yeah, it absolutely wobbles back and forth. And I phoned my friend Dave up and I said, I think I see gravitational lensing here. Tell me what you think. And he looked at it, and sure enough, he's like, yeah, you're right. This is just weird. And then here's another one. You can see this is the second cloud, and you can see it's wobbling there. And then there's a third one along here, third lensing event. And this one's also really interesting because the cloud gets totally deformed. Or it shows up twice. It's like all of a sudden there's a double exposure happening.
It's interesting that this object looks fuzzy enough that it doesn't trigger the same. Obviously, this is CGI instinct because it's just like not impressive enough. Whereas the other one is so shiny that it looks like it must be fake because it's too real.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's this question of is a UAP, they're either too blurry and not good enough for evaluation, or it's too crisp and clear and it's obviously fake. And there's actually a reason for it, but I'll show you here. You can see at the bottom here, the cloud is straight, then the cloud shows up twice, it's straight, then you see it again here, and then it's straight. And there's a reason for this, and I'll go over that in a little bit. But this is the Alcubierre shape function. I know some of your viewers will have watched this before, but those who haven't or seen this for the first time, essentially what's going on is the space around an object, UAP, is bent, expanded below, and then compressed above. And you see there's a V shape pointing down, there's a V shape pointing up, and another V shape pointing down. So what's going on is the best way to describe this, how gravity works, is massive objects in space will bend space towards itself, kind of like a lever effect. And the best description I ever heard was take a block of wood, drill a couple holes through it, thread some strings through it, tie them to the doorknob, and then pull the string apart. And that block of wood will move away from you and towards the doorknob. The doorknob represents the Earth. The strings represent the spatial curve caused by the Earth, and you are represented by the block of wood. It's a lever effect. All of the molecules in your body are simultaneously pulled just like this and pushed down towards the Earth. That's how gravity works. So going back to here, you can see there's a narrow space where the where the curve is pointing up and lots of parts where the curve is pointing down. What this means is there's a narrow section, disc-shaped section inside an Alcubierre warp bubble where a vehicle can exist. And it's absolutely no accident that UAP medium size are most typically shaped as a disc. And the reason being is if you're going to maximize your cargo space, your science space, your engineering space, to maximize the vehicle contents, you're going to make it a disc because that is the shape. Form follows function. And you have no choice but to make it a disc shape if you want to maximize the interior. Yeah, you can make it a triangle, but you're losing some of your cargo space. Yeah, you can make it a cylinder like a Tic Tac, but then you're losing more cargo space. So if you're flying a science vehicle and you want to have as many examination labs in there or whatever, you're going to make it a disc.
And what about orbs? We see a lot of orbs. Would that be an efficient form factor to use a warp drive with?
Yeah, the orb only has a single warp nacelle in it, and it typically just needs to be round or somewhat shaped like that. There's not a lot of cargo space in a remote controlled probe, so
yeah, it
doesn't need to be disc shaped.
Easier to imagine that those are drones for sure. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the idea of gravitational lensing here, what it is as a physical phenomenon.
Yeah, so in space, in astronomy, there's lots of examples where a galaxy is bending space, seen in the orange curves, and then light from something on the other side of the galaxy is getting bent like a lens back towards the Earth, and you'll see it, in this case, a quasar, it's going to be shows up 4 times. So that's essentially what gravitational lensing is, and if a UAP is bending space using Alcubierre warp drive, you're going to get the same effect. So what happens here is you've got an expansion below and a compression above, and light coming through is going to be bent, and it's going to bend up towards, in this case, a camera as the vantage point. And it's going to look like this. The roof line is going to bend down slightly above and even more so below the UAP. And on the right-hand side is a simulation of what gravitational lensing looks like as a black hole is passing in front of a galaxy.
Right. Everything kind of curves and bends around.
Yep. And it just so happens to look exactly like how I described here on the left. Now, Ryan Graves, him and his flight team, they've all seen this cube inside a clear sphere. And that's how they describe it. This is dark gray cube inside a clear round sphere. However, he didn't know about gravitational lensing and how it might be affected through an Alcubierre warp bubble. So I've created a rendering where I intentionally changed the background using a lens to show how an Alcubierre warp bubble would make a cube look like it's inside a round sphere. It's inside a round warp bubble, which makes it appear like it's inside a sphere. It's not a glass sphere, it's a warp sphere.
That is a pretty interesting idea, man. Honestly, it does have the kind of ring of truth to it, because it seems more reasonable that a warp field might be a natural thing for something to have around it than a sphere of plastic or glass. Although we are talking about, weird stuff here. So
exactly.
We should also say that there have been plenty of mumblings over the years about the possibility that advanced military tech has reverse engineered some UAP tech effectively, and it's possible that things like this could be human. So people shouldn't just necessarily assume that we're talking about extraterrestrials only, although that's a reasonable hypothesis to forward and explore. Yep. But just put that in the back of your mind or the side of your head or wherever you keep interesting things.
Yep. Could
be advanced human tech too.
That's possible, but I'm going to show some historical photos showing this type of lensing effect, and then you'll realize maybe now that disc that we just watched, maybe it's human made. But if that was a video from the 1950s or 60s, the answer is a hard no.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think stuff from the last 20 years, it's certainly much easier to believe that could potentially be advanced human tech. Stuff from the 40s and 50s, really, really hard to imagine. Like if that were the case, then there would be other very strange things going on, which you couldn't necessarily rule out, but it would be extremely weird that we hadn't seen that technology anywhere else after 80 years. So let's move on into your Tic Tac, and this is like a heads-up display analysis. You're going to talk to us about one of the readouts on one of these Tic Tac videos.
Yeah. So David Fravor, in the video, you can see the clip there, the link there. He described there's a little thing called 99 range. I've highlighted in red. The left image is the TV camera, visible camera, and the right is the infrared camera. And it's important to identify that the operator, Chad Underwood, was switching between two different cameras, and they were both showing the same object. But within it was this little coded signal that popped up, 99.9, range 99.
Also, I just want to flag that this is not a video of David Fravor's direct experience. This is, it could be from that same Tic Tac. Do you know, is it from the follow-up video that got shot after Fravor and Dietrich came back after their Tic Tac encounter?
Yes, it was. David Fravor and Alex Dietrich did not video it.
Right.
Later that day or the next day, another pilot, Chad Underwood, and his backseater, they went out and they actually found one and they filmed it.
Okay. And then could you explain that 99.9 thing again, please?
Yeah, I'll show it right now. So the 99.9 is an active radar jamming signal. What it means is that signal comes up when the aircraft radar is receiving its radar signal in duplicate or multiples. So let's say so real world systems for radar jamming, the way it works, and you really need to break it down to understand. A radar sends out a pulse. The pulse goes towards the aircraft. The radar pings off the aircraft, but the aircraft has recorded that ping and then sends out a duplicate signal right afterwards. And it might be more than one duplicate signal. So every radar has its own unique digital signature, so that if there's two or more radars tracking one object, they can tell what signal is theirs and what signal is not theirs. And that's important, so that two aircraft tracking the same bogey the radars won't confuse each other. So in this case, what's going on is the bogey is sending more duplicate signals afterwards. And the reason why they do that is really important, is radar guided missiles. If you were to fire one at this thing, it doesn't go to it and strike it. It actually blows up beside it, and the shrapnel then takes out the aircraft. That's how these radar guided missiles work. So by sending out lots of duplicate signals, the radar can't tell how far away it is. It could be a mile away or 20 miles away. It won't know because
the way the radars triangulate is by measuring the time that it takes for their signal to return to them, right? So if they send out a signal, they get that signal back, but then they immediately get a whole bunch more signals. They can't accurately calculate the time that it took, and they can't therefore calculate where the object is.
Yeah, they could tell where it was with the first ping, but after that, there's no way to tell.
Okay.
So it protects the bogey aircraft from getting struck by an aircraft or an anti-aircraft radar guided missile.
Got it.
So why did that signal show up to Chad Underwood's radar? There are two possibilities. The object was actually actively jamming it, sending out multiple signals, or it could be a natural consequence of the Alcubierre warp drive. So what happens is when a signal goes out, theoretically, you have compressed space above the upper half of the object, and expanded space on the lower half of the object. So what that means is that radar signal is going to split into two. The lower path is shorter through space, and the upper path is longer through space. So that radar signal is going to split into two separate, distinct signals.
Huh. Interesting. And creating like kind of an echo effect because they're coming back at slightly different times.
Exactly. They come back approximately, the math I calculated, about 12 meters. So the lower
Huh.
path is 6 meters sooner than it should have been, and the upper path is 6 meters longer than it should have been. So
Huh.
it's 12 meters, but that's enough for the radar to think that it's getting a jamming signal, because it's now getting duplicate signals indicating that it believes there's active jamming happening.
Dude, that is really fascinating. Great math. I'm just going to stop and applaud you for that. It's a really cool use of math that you just demonstrated.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So there's this question about calibration. And many debunkers, not just one, but many debunkers use some kind of calibration question to nullify this TikTok event. And it's an important thing that we have to spell out here, is that even if it was a calibration issue, that signal, that 99 range signal, means it received 2 or more identical pulses. That's not a calibration issue. That is a defined duplicate of its radar signal. No calibration error could have caused that. It would give you an actual different error message if it was a calibration issue. And then the next question is, how often does the Navy calibrate their systems? Well, it turns out the aircraft radar is calibrated every time the aircraft is turned on when it's prepping for takeoff. And the at-FLIR pod is automatically calibrated every time it turns on. And so calibration happens at startup. Period, end of story, end of discussion. And the shipboard radar, well, how do they calibrate it? Well, it turns out they're calibrated daily as well. And the question is why? And lives literally depend on these systems functioning. People's will die if these don't function properly. Someone could easily get lost at sea, and it was hard lessons learned by the Navy. And so they have these very strict calibration protocols that happen every single day. So let's go review a couple of the statements by some debunkers, or a debunker who will remain unnamed. He said,
this is useful, by the way. We should just say, I'm not here to dunk on debunkers. I think it's cool that people are trying to figure out potential explanations for these things.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I mean, yeah, they were trying to come up with an explanation that would allow them to dismiss it. But, this one said, we don't even know if the Navy calibrates its sensors the way we calibrate telescopes. Well, my response to that would be, does your life depend on your telescope functioning properly? No, but if you were to, if it was something that your life literally depended on, yeah, you damn well make sure you calibrate your telescopes. And then the same debunker had also said at another time on another topic, he said about debating creationism. The good thing about science is that it's true whether you believe it. Check your facts before making claims. And this debunker did not check his facts before he made claims about calibrating. He threw out this question. He never checked anything, and that was 4 years ago. And he never retracted his statements after many subject matter experts, SMEs, reported calibration of Navy radars and at-FLIR pods occurred daily and upon aircraft startup. Even the declassified manuals also describe this. The information's there for anyone to look at. It's easy to find.
All right. Well, that's a good debunk of a debunk.
Yeah. And so really, what does this come down to? What it means is the debunkers are falling for confirmation bias. So what is confirmation bias? And this is the Britannica's description: people's tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with their existing beliefs. This biased approach to decision-making is largely unintentional, and it results in a person ignoring information that is inconsistent with their beliefs. These beliefs can include a person's expectations in a given situation and their predictions about a particular outcome. People are especially likely to process information to support their own beliefs when an issue is highly important or self-relevant.
Yeah, as in it goes to our own identity, how we feel about ourselves.
Exactly.
It's a bias we all have to be aware of. It's just kind of like the gravitational warping of our human brains. It's how we work, so we got to look out for it.
That's exactly it. So I asked ChatGPT 2 distinct questions, and I wanted to ask a independent, unbiased, unemotional entity, ChatGDP, to review the TikTok specifically, that event, and is it possible that the debunkers were falling for confirmation bias? And ChatGDP's answer was a confirmed yes. The patterns observed in the public UAP debate strongly indicate the presence of confirmation bias among many skeptics and scientists. Skeptics who automatically dismiss multimodal corroborated evidence without evaluating fairly are displaying classic confirmation bias. They favor evidence that supports their existing worldview. They minimize or ignore inconvenient data, and they deflect credible sources with superficial doubts rather than engaging substantively. The misuse of Carl Sagan's quote, "extraordinary evidence," has in many cases become a shield for confirmation bias, allowing skeptics to dismiss strong evidence without confronting its full implications. In any other scientific field, medicine, engineering, especially engineering, and physics, such dismissive behavior towards credible, corroborated evidence would be considered unethical, unprofessional, and potentially damaging scientific credibility. I can tell you as an engineer, it turns out we engineers, we are the only scientists in the world that are subject to a government legislated ethics body. Every state, every province has their own version of it. And it's unbelievable. And the reason why is because lives really literally depend on our decision making. If an engineer did this, confirmation bias in the real world, in a real world setting, I shouldn't say real world, in a setting that is not controversial, they would likely experience censorship, which could be a fine of up to $5,000, or they could lose their license. But astronomers, they might have a voluntary organization they belong to, but there's no ethics that is to this level. We are held above a higher bar than any other scientific community. Period. End of story. So when I see stuff like what I just described, it boils my blood, because in my world, that's unacceptable behavior that could get a person fired, or lose their licenses. And we've seen in all these videos, documentaries like engineering disasters, and those things happen because of confirmation bias in some cases.
That's a really interesting point, that engineers have higher stakes basically in analyzing truth claims.
Yeah.
Abstract theory, science, it's important, and it can get us to really interesting places. Usually engineering is then downstream of those more abstract scientific discoveries.
Yeah.
But you're where the rubber hits the road in terms of whether these theories are actually accurate.
Yeah.
Cool point.
Exactly. So that behavior it irks me. So for the skeptical people out there who might say, well, you're picking on debunkers, I also asked ChatGDP, what about researchers, UFO researchers? Do we fall for confirmation bias? And the answer is also yes.
Yeah.
Skeptics use dismissive bias. UAP researchers use embracing bias. They accept work too quickly. And a really good example was presented recently by Ross Coulthart on a News Nation presentation. There's a video about the MH370, and there's this video of a jet apparently taken from satellite, and there's these three orbs that spin around and it disappears.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this case. And so somebody found the background image, like this picture of the clouds,
so
from a stock footage website.
Yep, exactly. So going back to my CGI training, when you use a background object, or you apply a text, what we call a texture, to, let's say you want to do a wood grain on a cabinet, you would apply a photo of a wood grain to as a texture to the object. And that's why this is from textures.com. It's specifically for CGI animation, and it's a photograph of a cloud, and whoever created the render of the aircraft and the three orbs used this texture they bought from textures.com for, or maybe it was a free download, but for the background image. And so this is absolutely a CGI rendering.
Yeah.
And there is one researcher out there.
His name is Ashton Forbes, I think.
Yeah, he's embraced this thing and he has refused to accept it as being CGI, even though someone had found the original textures.com photograph.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I don't remember Ashton's explanation for why he isn't convinced by this finding, but to the rest of us, it really looks like case closed on this one.
Yeah, so that is a classic example of embracing bias.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as researchers, we are going to find CGI stuff. The question is you have to be willing to rule them out, even on the cautious side. So sometimes there will be something where you're like, well, it might be real, but I can't be certain. So I'm going to lean towards it might be CGI, something like that. But you have to be willing to accept defeat sometimes.
Yeah. There might come a day not long after we release this video that somebody explains away the video that we started with, and we'll just kind of have to scrap it and move on. That will be accepted as new information. I think a lot about I think it's an Edison quote about the 1,000 experiments that led to the light bulb or something. And people said, oh, so you failed 1,000 times. And he said, no, I succeeded in demonstrating 1,000 things that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of the value of debunking or this iterative process in science where sometimes you find boring things, but you're just like ruling stuff out. And sometimes that's an important part of the process.
Yeah. So when I was going through all those different videos and I found that one we presented at the beginning, it's really, I'm looking for background lensing and vapor cones and a couple other tiny signatures that are hard to spot. And so if I don't see any of those signatures in a video or a photograph, I ignore it. I go, well, it's inconclusive. I'll move on.
Interesting.
So getting back into the vapor cones. Yeah, Alcubierre creates a vapor cone. This is the Aguadilla UAP. Now I did a color code on it to emphasize that the UAP was hot, but there's this white cloud that's been forming over top of it as it passes in front of darker background objects. So there's a few passes. You don't see it much because usually the background object's colder, about the same color as the cloud. So it doesn't show up a lot, but it shows up. So the reason why, and you can see here, is the spatial compression above. That's where the cloud forms. And on the right-hand side is a classic photograph of a jet with its vapor cloud forming behind it instead of in front or above it. And it's adiabatic cooling. It's how air conditioners work. And so there have been, since the publication of my book, a couple of other videos that have come up. Skywatcher AI, they put out their part 2 video, and they actually describe seeing vapor clouds forming above. And they said there appears to be some kind of cloud or vapor around it. So this is 2 of 3 stills that they've shared. And then another one that was posted by Vedit just a couple of days ago was posted on Reddit from Perth, Australia. And here's 3 screen captures. And you can see that there's this vapor cloud forming around it. But as it's forming around it, the object is passing through it. And another interesting part of this particular video is it was strobing on and off. It was a green orb, and it was strobing on and off. And then the vapor cloud was being lit by the green, so it would also disappear as the light turned off, and it would reappear as the light turned on. But the whole video, this vapor cloud is forming in front of and then dissipating behind it. So this is another example. This is a really good example of vapor clouds forming. Now, there's one more vapor cloud formation, and it was taken by Rex Heflin, I believe, 1965. He took 4 photographs. He used a Polaroid camera, and what he had captured was this disc-shaped object. And the first 2 photos, A and C, they're blurry, but yet the telephone poles in the background, they're crystal clear. So somehow the UAP itself was blurry, and it goes back to UFOs that are blurry, or, well, we can't tell because they're blurry, but if they're crisp and clear, they're obviously fakes, and there's a reason for it. The third photo, number or letter B, shows I'll describe that in a second. And then D actually shows a cloud ring or a smoke ring. But what it is you can see circled in red, that's the UAP off at a distance. And it darted off very quickly, just like the first video we watched. And it went through the vapor cloud it created and left behind this ring that dissipated moments after it departed. And that's a vapor cloud caused by the sudden acceleration. This is 1965. So I'm going to zoom in now on that third photograph. So I've got it original on the left and I've got it highlighted on the right. So what's going on is highlighted in green is the craft in normal space, and highlighted in red is the craft showing itself in warped space. So what has happened was, and I'll go back here, and there's a reason why there's a blur, is actually, you know what? Let's go to the next one. Here's the reason why it blurs. When you're looking through the window and you do not have the warp drive on, A on the left is going to show what the real world looks like. It's going to be normal. It's going to be properly sized. But when you turn the warp drive on, because of gravitational lensing, even the occupants will see changes. And so the outside becomes compressed and stretched. And so it looks like you're seeing mostly sky, but when you turn off the warp drive, you're actually seeing mostly ground and hills. And so going back to here and here, this is a safety feature. This is a flight safety feature. You're going to oscillate your warp drive on and turning your camera off. Instead of using a window, you're going to use a camera system. And there's no place for a proper cockpit and a round disc anyway, so you use a camera system, and you alternate your cameras on and off with alternate to your warp drive. And if you oscillate it, say 15 to 30 times a second, you can get a real world picture looking like A on the left-hand side instead of the warp picture B on the right-hand side. So it allows you to see the real world, even though you're inside a gravitational distortion that would normally warp the outside view. So what happened here in this particular photo, Rex Polaroid camera captured a duplicate, a double exposure, you could say, and a Polaroid camera that's not capable of doing double exposures. And you see halfway through the exposure that the warp system turned on or off. So you're seeing it both on and off in the same photograph. And so the red one shows it smeared and pulled to the right, and the green is the normal shape to the left. And so
interesting. And so you're postulating that might represent the oscillation that it would take for the craft to be able to visualize the real world in the way it really is.
Yep.
So are you suggesting that they basically would turn on and off the warp drive really fast frequently to check in on the real state of the world outside?
Yep. Normal cameras operate between 15 and 30 hertz per second, 30 frames per second. And so if you oscillate your warp drive at the same amount, you can have a really good image of the outside.
And still keep your craft floating.
And still keep your craft floating and safe. And so this is why all the photos are blurred, because it's oscillating and you're seeing the craft in two positions at the same time.
Huh.
And then the other part of the blur is actually, as it's shown here on the right, is the light is going through the warp bubble, the expansion of the warp bubble back to the camera. So and Rex Huffman said even to his own eyes the craft looked blurry, and that's the reason. This is a photographic evidence of a warp drive oscillating for flight safety reasons.
Fascinating theory yet again.
Yep.
All right, what do you got next?
All right, so next is nested warp flight control systems. So you may have noticed that disc was tilted, and there's a reason for it. If you have a large warp drive, all the literature says the Alcubierre warp drive cannot have flight control functionality. With a single warp drive, that's true, but if you nest 3 smaller warp drives inside a large warp drive, you can create an asymmetric bubble, which means you can now control which direction your craft is turning. Right. New thing, Hopef, China, was photo taken either 1911 or 42. The disc is tilted, and you can see there's a spatial warp to the disc, showing that there's a gravitational lensing of the disk. There's the Trent photos from 1950 and 1954. You can see a compression on the left-hand side of both disks and an expansion on the right, and the protrusion out the top is bending and is off-center. This is a new one that I found actually just recently. It's new to me. It's a 1950 photo by George Stock from Mosaic, New Jersey. The disc was tilted, but the first photo, you can see the upper part, that bulbous part, is off-center to the right, and there's another compression on the right-hand side and an expansion on the left-hand side, basically mirror of these ones. And then I was bringing up the tilted flight, just a reminder, and then Trinidad photos, 4 photographs, all 4, the craft is tilted. 2 photos, there's a spatial compression on the right-hand side and expansion on the left-hand side, and then the other 2 are symmetric, which means the nested warps were not on versus when they were on the left-hand side. Significance of this observation, it's a new observable feature. Now, I wanted to describe very quickly, reminder here that when you do a daisy chain, each warp bubble does impact the next one, and you can either create a larger bubble, and then by creating a cone of daisy chain, you can create the strength of the bubble. And so what you would do is you'd create a whole bunch of micro warp bubbles inside a couple of cylinders, one across down the main, and then some on the outside. And then this is, I wanted to explain that real quick to explain why that disk darted off horizontally so quickly. If you have a bunch of smaller warp bubbles, or warp nacelles, I should say, and you point them horizontally along the length of your disk and you turn them all simultaneously, that cone shape creates a much larger warp bubble oriented horizontally to your craft. And that's how that disk zipped off so quickly horizontally, is it took all its warp nacelles, pointed them in one direction, and turned them all on simultaneously. Now, the cone feature brings up another interesting thing here. You can use that for your nesting. So what you can do is you can put your main warp nacelle down the center of the craft, and yeah, it could protrude up through the top a little bit. And you saw that in the Trent and the Rouen photos. And then you can have you would have secondary warp bubbles or warp nacelles at the bottom, and then that configuration would create a much larger, of all 4 are turned on, creates a much larger bubble that encloses the entire craft. Does this configuration look familiar to you?
Like as a craft, you mean?
Yeah, as in the warp nacelle configuration in a craft. Does that look familiar to you?
I don't know, the Star Trek Enterprise, maybe?
Nope.
What am I looking for?
Bob Lazar sport model.
Huh. Okay.
So we have 3 smaller warp nacelles at the bottom and 1 large waveguide through the top. It's exactly the same as this. 1 large waveguide going up, but instead of, he called it a waveguide, but it was just another warp nacelle.
Can I ask maybe kind of a stupid question here? When you mention this idea about turning all the nacelles on in the direction that you're heading, the image that I'm calling to mind is like Moses parting the sea, like you're pulling space apart so you can move quickly through it from A to B. Mm-hmm. Does that sound right to you?
No, I wouldn't call it pulling space apart. It's more like you're pushing the space apart behind you.
Okay.
But you're pulling it together in front of you.
Okay, so kind of like that, your analogy with the strings running through the blocks, you're pulling the strings open behind you to shoot you forward.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. I'm just trying to understand why the vapor cone or vapor cloud wouldn't appear in front. So it's and I think I have a slightly clearer idea, but now my question would be, why wouldn't it appear behind you, like in the back of, just like it does in the jet picture where the jet is moving forward and the vapor cloud appears in the back because that's where space is expanding more. It does look like in that one picture from the 50s, you said like the the vapor cloud is behind the object, basically, which flew through it. So what do you have a theory about why in the video that we watched at the beginning of this, the vapor cloud would be above instead of behind the object as it jets off to the right?
Yeah, there's a real good reason. Like I said, when gas is expanding, it cools down real quick, and you're going to see the water vapor form droplets. Now, behind it, the space is expanding, which means air that suddenly finds itself in an expanded space is getting compressed. So think of it this way. If you had 100 cubic feet of air suddenly find itself in an expanded space of 10 cubic feet of air, it's going to get...
I'm sorry, you mean contracted space? I was a little confused.
Okay, so above, it's contracted, and below it's expanded. So it's a relativistic thing. So
shit, I'm sorry, I had this exactly backwards. I thought you were saying that the vapor appears because space is expanding. So the
air is expanding. It's a complicated a relativistic thing. So if you have space, a section of space, and you compress it down, let's say you take 10 cubic feet of space, and you compress it down to 1 cubic foot compared to space 100 feet away, it's going to look like it's 1 cubic foot of space, but you actually have 10 cubic feet of space compressed into 1 cubic feet, 1 cubic foot. And then, so if something like a bird flew into that compressed space, it would suddenly find itself inside a much bigger pocket of space. So if you were to wrap that compressed space in a cube or in a sphere, and the bird flew into the sphere, it would suddenly think, wow, how did I get into a room when I thought I was going into a beach ball? So
okay, that kind of made sense. So by compressing the space, you're expanding the air.
Yeah.
Is that sort of...
Yes.
Right.
That's it exactly. So the air is expanding inside that compressed space. The air realizes it's inside a much bigger pocket of space, and it just goes blah and expands rapidly.
Super counterintuitive. Okay, so and then conversely, when the space behind expands, the air contracts. So it would do the opposite of make a vapor cloud.
And it would heat up.
It would heat up.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's also not something we've seen, at least in recorded sensor data about these objects as they're zipping off. But we have, frankly, precious little of that. So I'm not going to draw too many conclusions there, but thank you for walking me through that, because it's complicated. And it also made me think of something we've heard in a fair amount of commentary about reverse engineering. This is like mumbling whispers. Who knows if it's true, but people who have claimed to have engaged with reverse engineering projects, or sometimes experiencers, have reported seeing objects that from the inside seemed a lot bigger than they seemed from the outside.
And that's how it works.
Doctor Who TARDIS.
That's exactly how it works. So if you had compressed space inside a disk, you would look at the outside of the disk and you think, okay, this disk is 30 feet in diameter. But you walk inside and the space inside is compressed, and now it's 200 feet in diameter. And you're like, how is it so much bigger? I mean, there's a really good Star Trek Enterprise episode where that happened, where they had recovered some object. It was, the size of a minivan, or a little bit bigger than a large minivan, and it was 20 feet long, 10 feet in diameter, and they stuck their head in, and it was enormous inside. How is that possible? It's because space is compressed.
And it's a staple of Doctor Who. Again, it's the Whovian physics mechanics. You go into the telephone box and it's bigger on the inside.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So that's how it works.
Good metaphor for personal psychology too.
Yeah.
All right, let's clip through. Just for our sake, how much more chart do we have to go through?
I have 2 more things to go. Okay. I'm almost done. All right. So here, we've all heard of the 5 observables. And there's a 6th that was put out with the publication of the book Eminent Biological Effects. Through my research, I found 4 more, I think, that are legitimate observables. And they actually provide signatures. Gravitational lensing. It's a relativistic gravitational signature, leading edge vapor cones, the oscillation blur I described, and the tilted low velocity disk flight near ground. And that tilt is how you counteract Earth's gravity. If you want to go forward, you have to point it up so that you don't fall towards the ground, but you have to point it slightly forward so you can get a slight forward momentum. It's the same as a helicopter. The helicopter tilts its rotor slightly forward and then it moves forward.
Yes. Oh, this is so great, man. Great idea and great way to like formalize this and bring it in for a kind of intellectual landing here, because you're proposing things we can look for. This is, you're making hypotheses about scientifically investigatable observables.
Yep.
Good job.
Exactly. Thanks. So the last thing was one other flight safety issue I wanted to bring up. So remember back when we had the image of space, the outside of the world looking compressed, and looking at that disk zipping off at, in this case, 25% speed. What would happen if your disk, if you as the pilot thought you were looking at the real world, thought you were pointing up, but in fact you were pointing your craft down and you zipped forward at that incredible speed? So here, that's a New Mexico desert. You think you're looking up and you hit, okay, ludicrous speed. I'm going to go off at warp drive super fast out of the atmosphere. But what if you were actually pointing down and you didn't realize it because you weren't oscillating the warp drive, and what you're seeing isn't actually where you're going to go? And so what would happen? And you zipped off at 3,000 miles per hour, you're going to skip across the Earth's surface like a saucer skipping over water. However, striking the Earth at that shallow angle is going to leave a large debris trail, a couple 100 feet wide, a couple of miles long. Does that sound familiar to you?
No. Are we talking about Roswell?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a plausible explanation for why the Roswell crash happened. It was pilot error, and they simply zipped off, thought they were pointing up, and they weren't. They were pointing slightly down, and they skimmed the ranch's surface and obliterated the bottom half of the craft, and in the upper half would have flown off several miles and crash landed somewhere else.
Wow. That's a pretty interesting idea, man.
Yeah, there's no way to prove it, but it is a plausible hypothesis as to why that crash happened.
Yeah, it also seems like the kind of thing that would happen every now and then if you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of sorties by these things. Every now and then, somebody might just take off in the wrong direction by a fraction of a degree and explode over the desert, causing 80 years of consternation in the humans trying to figure out what the heck happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that was a great rundown. Thank you for digging up that video. Is there anything you want to say to put a bow on our outing today?
That's a really, I'm not sure, honestly. Like, there's the obvious, it'd be nice if people bought the book, but they don't have to. I put the book out because I was trying to get it published. And as Dr. Villaroo discovered, publishing any UAP research is incredibly difficult. And it was just easier to put it out as the book for anyone to read than it was. We actually tried publishing it through a couple of different means, and we would have, if had it been published, we would have got no money for it. So the book is out there not to make money, but to get the information out there, because it's the only means.
Let's just say the name of it one more time so people can go look it up on Amazon, and we will include a link in the description for sure. But it's Hidden in Plain Sight: Evidence of Exotic UFO Propulsion.
Yep.
And that's by Chad Wanless and his pal, Professor Dave Palachuk, who joined us last time. Well, Chad, if you run into any other videos that you want to do a dive on, our door is always open, and I'd love to do more of this. And I just want to applaud you again for really the specificity and clarity of your ideas. Like you have some very clear, identifiable hypotheses, and you've used them to make specific, observable predictions for scientists to pursue going forward. I think that's an excellent contribution to the field. And I think you're doing great work, man. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.